Welcome to the Climate Book Review. The Climate Book Review is a radio show and podcast featuring book reviews and reading lists for fiction, nonfiction, and poetry with climate themes. Climate Book Review airs every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Central on WDBX 91.1 FM, solar-powered community radio for Southern Illinois. You can also find the show online at wdbx.org, climatebookreview.com, and on your favorite podcast app or site. My name is Treesong. I am the host of the Climate Book Review. The two main segments of the show are the Climate Book of the Week and the Climate Reading List of the Week. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. This is also a fall pledge drive for WDBX, so if you enjoy this show or any of the many other shows that we have on WDBX, please show your support. WDBX is a nonprofit and operates solely on donations from listeners and monthly pledge donors. Radio is free for the listener, but not free to produce and support, so please consider becoming a member with a monthly pledge. You can send your contribution to WDBX at 224 North Washington Street in Carbondale, Illinois, 62901, or you can make your pledge online at wdbx.org. You have the option to set a one-time donation or a monthly pledge, which is the way I do it. Every time, every little bit helps. So, thank you for listening and thank you for supporting WDBX. Now it's time for our Climate Book of the Week. This week's Climate Book of the Week is Heart Spring Mountain by Robin MacArthur. Heart Spring Mountain by Robin MacArthur is the story of a woman named Vale who returns to her hometown in rural Vermont in search of her missing mother, Bonnie. Along the way, the story touches on the lives of several generations of women in Vale's family and the role of climate change in the storm that led to Bonnie's disappearance. While this novel has several interwoven themes, it is first and foremost a story about women, family, and the distinct sense of place in history that helps bind this particular family together. The story unfolds in three successive eras as three generations of women living on Heart Spring Mountain navigate the joys and sorrows of life, love, family, and everything in between. The chapters alternate between the different eras, telling several separate life stories that eventually come together into a single complex family history, focused primarily on the women of the family. The rich imagery paints a vivid picture of life in rural Vermont, and the engaging inner narratives of the characters over the course of their various adventures draw the reader into the novel. I found it fascinating as someone living in a rural and semi-rural area. It's a little different than Vermont, but I found a lot of things interesting and relatable in those regards. Heart Spring Mountain is also the story of how these women's lives were forever changed by the landfall of Hurricane Irene in 2011. This makes it one of the few works of climate fiction to explore the impacts of a real-life storm and to connect those impacts explicitly to climate change. The characters in this novel aren't actively responding to climate change in any political way. They're not proposing climate solutions or facing any climate catastrophes beyond those that already exist today in the real world. Any readers who are looking for a heavy-handed climate-themed political thriller or a disaster story will want to look elsewhere. Instead, this novel is part of a growing trend in climate fiction that uses a more traditional literary narrative to tell a story that happens to include climate change as a major theme. The characters are living their lives in all of their authenticity and rich complexity. When the arrival of the storm pushes the main character, Vale, to contemplate the role of climate change in the disappearance of her mother and the world generally. In that regard, it reminds me a bit of how the other book I reviewed recently, Troubled Waters, is in many ways a story about family, about the lives of the characters, but has a major intersection with climate change. In that case, it was much more direct of the characters taking action to respond to climate change. But in this one, they are mostly working to survive it and to reflect on its role in their lives. Heartspring Mountain is an excellent example of how the theme of climate change is increasingly making its way into traditional literary fiction, to the benefit of both the literary community and climate change discourse. People in real life are increasingly understanding and contemplating the role of climate change in their lives and the world. So it's only fitting that contemporary literature should reflect this trend in various ways. Even novels that aren't specifically focused on climate change should address the climate question in some way, due to the extent to which it affects all aspects of contemporary life. Heartspring Mountain isn't at all a heavy-handed work of climate fiction, yet it still makes valuable contributions to climate change discourse. Fiction that explores real-life storms and disasters is an important and personally compelling way for people to process such events and their broader implications. The plot, characters, and settings of this novel are all interesting and entertaining in their own right. And the inclusion of a socially relevant theme like climate change enhances what readers can get out of this novel. Readers who just picked up the novel for the sake of a good read won't be disappointed. And the readers who are looking for climate change narratives will hopefully find that the references to a real-life storm with climate change implications makes for a fascinating and rewarding read. I know I found it that myself. Whether you're looking for climate fiction or just looking for a good story, I definitely recommend checking out Heartspring Mountain by Robin MacArthur. Now it's time for the Climate Reading List of the Week. This week's Climate Reading List of the Week is Climate Crisis Consequences. Ooh. So what are the consequences of the climate crisis? Heat waves, floods, fires, hurricanes, especially relevant in the wake of Hurricane Helen, which just happened as of this airing. These are just a few of the most obvious and direct consequences of the climate crisis. How exactly is the climate changing? What changes have already happened? What changes will we see in our lifetime? How will all of this affect our day-to-day lives and the health, safety, and security of our communities and societies? The Climate Crisis Consequences Reading List features books that will help you find the answers to these and many other questions related to the climate crisis and its consequences for human and non-human life. So this is a list I came up with a while ago, and I wanted to mention it on the air. It seems particularly relevant this week. And this is a very preliminary list. This is just a few of the books on this theme that have caught my eye. So if you have other titles that you think would fit well on this list, you can feel free to email me. My email address is info@climatebookreview.com. I'm increasingly wanting to do lists where I have several select titles as the main list and then a really long list of titles that are related to the theme, because this is another one that would fit that well, because thankfully there are many new books coming out that are related to the consequences of the climate crisis. So let's explore these ones that we have on our list for today. The first one is Our Final Warning, 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency by Mark Linus. This book must not be ignored. It really is our final warning. Mark Linus delivers a vital account of the future of our Earth, our civilization, if current rates of global warming persist. And it's only looking worse. We are living in a climate emergency, but how much worse could it get? Will civilization collapse? Are we already past the point of no return? What kind of future can our children expect? Rigorously cataloging the very latest climate science, Mark Linus explores the course we have set for Earth over the next century and beyond. Degree by terrifying degree, he charts the likely consequences of global heating and the ensuing climate catastrophe. That is one of the things I found most compelling about this. Well, I've actually read the predecessor to this, but this book takes a similar approach. But at 1 degree, for example, the world we are already living in, vast wildfires scorch California and Australia, while monster hurricanes devastate coastal cities and increasingly inland cities. So it goes through each degree, 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and uses evidence to explain some of the things that are likely to happen at those degrees. So like at 5 degrees, for example, the planet is warmer than it has been for 55 million years. So yes, these escalating consequences can still be avoided, but time is running out. We must largely stop burning fossil fuels within a decade if we are to save the coral reefs and the Arctic. And if we fail, we risk crossing tipping points that could push global climate chaos out of humanity's control. One of the biggest things about this particular book is that it is both very broad in what it covers, and yet it also has a very good sort of narrative structure, if you call it that, for a nonfiction book. But it does a good job of explaining what it will be like to be in this world as the temperatures rise. The next one on the list is The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet by Jeff Goodell. So this one is about how the world is waking up to a new reality. Wildfires are now seasonal in California, the Northeast is getting less and less snow each winter, and the ice sheets in the Arctic and Antarctica are melting fast. Heat is the first-order threat that drives all other impacts of the climate crisis. And as the temperatures rise, it is revealing fault lines in our governments, our politics, our economy, and our values. The basic science is not complicated. Stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, and the global temperature will stop rising tomorrow. Stop burning fossil fuels in 50 years, and the temperature will keep rising for 50 years. So The Heat Will Kill You First is about the extreme ways in which our planet is already changing. It's about why spring is coming a few weeks earlier, and fall is coming a few weeks later, and the impact that will have on everything from our food supply to disease outbreak. It's about what will happen to our lives and in our communities when typical summer days in Chicago or Boston go from 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, a lot of times just a little margin, especially if you're used to it and then you go out in the heat not expecting it to be slightly hotter, that can be intense. Next title on the list is The Best of Times, The Worst of Times, Futures from the Frontiers of Climate Science. The environmental emergency is the greatest threat we face. Preventing it will require an unprecedented political and social response. And yet, there is still hope. Academic physicist, environmental expert, and award-winning science communicator Paul Behrens presents a radical analysis of a civilization on the brink of catastrophe. Setting out the pressing existential threats we face, he writes in alternating chapters of what future could look like, at its most pessimistic and hopeful. So it goes back and forth between the two. Another title to look at is Enviromedics, like enviro as the first half of the word and medics as the second. The impact of climate change on human health. This is one I think about a lot because in old climate communications there was a lot of messaging about polar bears, and polar bears are lovely, wonderful creatures, but I suspect most humans are pressingly concerned about how this affects human health. Many of us have concerns about the effects of the climate crisis on Earth, but we often overlook the essential issue of human health. This book addresses that oversight and enlightens readers about the most important aspect of one of the greatest challenges of our time. Here's another title on the list: The Geography of Risk: Epic Storms, Rising Seas, and the Cost of America's Coasts. So they're talking about expensive hurricanes, and we just had one that still needs to be tallied. But they say that 5 of the most expensive hurricanes in history, up to the point of this book being published, had made landfall since 2005. Katrina, Ike, Sandy, Harvey, and Maria. Hundreds of billions of dollars in some cases, but billions of dollars in each of these cases. And that is just, the math is sort of a shorthand for the disaster that it causes that is incalculable. The next book on the list is Storming the Wall: Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security by Todd Miller. Now, I've had this one recommended to me. I have not read this one yet, but my understanding is that it does a good job of balancing, showing the crisis created by mass migration caused by the climate crisis, but also showing the flaws in responding to that migration with security measures rather than through helping people. Because that is often the response nowadays when people are migrating due to the climate crisis or other reason, is to respond with a security response when a helping response could be more productive. So another one on the list, I included this one even though it is getting a little old at this point, but it was a groundbreaking piece of nonfiction that I still, I'd say maybe read the other one first, but this one is 6 Degrees: Our Future on a Hotter Planet by Mark Linus. This is the one that started it all with that trend of his. It is going degree by degree with how the evidence indicates the possible and actual consequences of the climate crisis, maybe. And at the time, it was the most graphic treatment of global warming that had been yet published. Because, I mean, there were other books before that got into some of the science, but this really takes the science and says, here's what it will look like in the world if this continues to happen. Groundbreaking work that still is relevant today. But obviously, if you are interested in that book, you will be interested in the more current first one on the list, which was Our Final Warning: 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency by Mark Linus. Thank you for listening to the Climate Book Review. You can find more information about this episode and show at climatebookreview.com. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support the show by telling your friends, giving the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast apps, and by donating to WDBX. This is especially important because we are doing our fall pledge drive right now. You can visit wdbx.org to make your donation. You can also mail it to us at 224 North Washington Street here in Carbondale, Illinois, 62901. WDBX offers such a diverse range of programming: unique points of view, live music, hard-to-find tunes, opera, jazz, folk, sports, talk shows, and so much more. You can help us stay on the air with your donations today. I like to say that WDBX has every type of music you can think of and some you couldn't even imagine. So please show your support at wdbx.org. Thank you to WDBX for broadcasting this and many other good shows. Thank you to Liborio Conti for the music in this show. And thank you to Ed Hawkins for the Warming Stripes graphic used in our logo. You can learn more about that at showyourstripes.info. It's a very simple and powerful way to illustrate the warming that is going on in our world today. Finally, thank you to everyone who is reading, writing, and taking action in response to the climate crisis. With our powers combined, we can make climate justice a reality.